Hey guys, welcome back. We're going to take a look at the European Middle Ages. So, following the fall of Rome, we obviously have some things going on, which we're going to spend some time and talk about that. So, some of the main ideas we're going to run into in this unit are going to be some empire building, or rebuilding, I guess we should say. So, in Western Europe, the Roman Empire had broken into many smaller kingdoms. And during the Middle Ages, we have some great names such as Charlemagne and Otto the Great, who tried to actually revive the idea of this vast empire, such as the Roman Empire was. Both allied with the Church, Christianity, very heavily, which we'll talk about. We move into power and authority. We have some weak rulers, basically at the beginning. We have the decline of central authority. Eventually, this is going to lead to something known as the feudal system, which we'll talk about and dive a little bit more into, in which we have local lords with large estates that assumed power. And eventually, this is going to lead to struggles over power with the church. And the church is kind of this growing power at this time. And then we have, obviously, religious and ethical systems. So during the Middle Ages, the church was unifying, and it was coming together as this large, powerful force. And it shaped people's beliefs and guided their daily lives. And most Europeans at the time shared this common bond of faith through Christianity. So we do have some terms of the unit that we'll have to become a little bit more familiar with. So you can pause here and take a look at those. We also have some figures in the unit. Again, we're going to take a look at some of these guys a little bit closer. And this is where we kind of leave off. So shortly following the fall of the Roman Empire, so if you remember in 476 AD, we have the Roman Empire officially collapsing, at least the Western Roman Empire, right? The Eastern Roman Empire is still a thing, and we see that here on the map, right? Constantinople being the home of the Eastern Roman Empire, the capital. So the Eastern Roman Empire is still going to exist for another 1,000 years after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. So the Western Roman Empire falls apart. Romulus Augustulus, the last of the Roman emperors, is ousted from his capital, and German invaders take over the Roman Empire. And basically, at that point in time, it collapses and falls into multiple tribal areas. And so we have this kind of growth of these tribal areas, of these Germanic tribes that start to spread throughout Western Europe. And we're going to take a look at some of these. So as we move through the Middle Ages timeline, we have Clovis, who we're going to talk about, Charles Martel, Pope Leo III, and who crowns the Emperor Charlemagne, which we'll talk about that. The Treaty of Verdun, which follows Charlemagne's empire. We'll talk about feudalism. We'll talk about Otto the Great and how the Holy Roman Empire starts to weaken. And there's going to be some additional points too that we'll add in as we go. So into part one, we have Europe post-Rome, or post-Roman Empire. So again, following the collapse of the Roman Empire in 476 AD, again, we have the Western Roman Empire throughout Europe collapses into smaller kingdoms, I guess we can call them, to where we have these Germanic tribes kind of taken over certain areas and breaking up that power. So what should we call this time period? That's one of the biggest things that actually comes up when we're looking at this time period following the fall of Rome in 476 AD. So from the fall of Rome all the way up to the time of the Renaissance, which kicks off in the 14th century, or near the end of the 14th century, we have come up with a few different names. So we have the Middle Ages, we have the medieval period, and the Dark Ages. Now, obviously, you guys have looked into the Dark Ages a little bit at this point and have recognized that the Dark Ages are kind of this earlier representation of this time period. So earlier historians, from 200 or 300 years ago, would call this time, this gap, the Dark Ages, mostly because it wasn't as enlightening as or artistic or scientific than the years that would follow during the Renaissance. So let's move into talking about the Dark Ages. All right. So typically the Dark Ages do fall generally a lot more earlier on during this time period. So from about 500 to 8 or 900, or maybe even up to 1000 AD. Which, I don't really care for the term the Dark Ages because really it wasn't. There was a lot of things going on. And the Dark Ages just makes you think that it was just a terrible time to live, which, it was. There was a lot of problems and disease and other things which we'll take a look at. But on the other side, there were some benefits to living during this time. So again, we talked about the German invaders, which came down and sacked the city of Rome and ousted Romulus Augustulus and ended the Western Roman Empire. And with this, right, we have the disruption of trade throughout the Roman Empire from both land and sea. All right, so the Europe's economic centers at this point in time just basically fell apart. The cities are abandoned for the most part, and populations flee to the countryside to try and get away from all of these problems. So Germanic invaders could not read or write, which basically left only the church the officials, the monks and the priests, the only ones that were able to read and write, which actually benefited Christianity in the long run. And we'll take a look at that. There was a common language before, right, of Latin in the Roman Empire. And at this point in time, those tribal languages, which as the tribes took over throughout Europe, those tribal languages would continue to expand, and Latin would be kind of drowned out and would slowly begin to disappear. By the 800s, we have a lot of more of the common languages of today, right? English, French, Spanish, Italian. They had basically all evolved from these tribal languages in Western Europe. This forced even more of the breakup that was of the once unified Roman Empire, right? So it's continuing even to make it more difficult for the Roman Empire to come back together. So these Germanic kingdoms began to replace the Roman provinces. We have the church as an institution, which actually survives the fall of the Roman Empire. So Christianity continues on spreading. And during this time, Christianity becomes much more important. The church provided order and security for a lot of people, and even for a lot of officials who were in power. In German society, or this Germanic society, we have a lot of family ties and personal loyalty. So we start to get into people that were protecting their lords, right? The people that were watching over them and kind of taking care of them. So every Germanic chief led a band of warriors who had pledged their loyalty to him. He gave them food, weapons, and treasure, and they felt no obligation to obey another king because they had a great life. And this guy was protecting them. So this made it impossible to establish an orderly government because you had all of these different Germanic chiefs claiming that they were the ones in charge. And they had all of these peasants and noblemen and people beneath them that would support them because they're giving them all this good stuff.